Hello, family. Hello, friends. Welcome back to another episode of Taboo Talks. Today is going to be such a powerful, healing, and potentially very relatable conversation for many of you who are watching. We're going to be joined by two beautiful goddesses who are sharing their stories, faces themselves, the journey that it's taken them on, and how they've really transmuted these shadows, into their superpowers now. So, welcome. Welcome, Heather. Heather, as everyone knows who's been watching, is a co-founder of SISociety. We have these conversations every Wednesday with different taboo talks, different taboo topics, I should say. And this week, Heather's also going to be serving as a guest. I'm going to be interviewing her, and she's going to be sharing her story of, of her own personal experience with sexual assault and what she's learned from it and how she has grown through it. And then we're also going to be joined by my dear soul sister, Oceana Rose, who will be joining us in just a moment. And so basically the first half of this conversation, we'll be talking with Heather, and then about halfway through, we'll be talking with Rose. So you're going to be able to hear two different perspectives and two different stories from these women who have really become so empowered through this experience. So welcome.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here from another perspective, from another realm.
Mm-hmm. You're
Mm-hmm.
in the hot seat now, baby.
Ooh, I feel it, honey.
Hello, love.
Oceana, Rosie.
Hello. I'm so excited and honored to be here. And I wish I wasn't in traffic, but hopefully I can pull over in the next few minutes. But I'm so excited to hear your story and hold witness for you, Heather. And yeah, thank you so much, Alfina, for inviting me, both of you.
It's an honor to have you here. And Alfina spoke so highly of you, and it's just so wonderful to meet you. And
Thank you.
it's your superpower of existing here and in traffic simultaneously.
It's like I really tried to make this work, but we're still gonna go for it. Luckily, I don't have to drive very fast right now. So
Beautiful.
thank
I
you.
feel
Called living in the yes and, like doing one thing and also simultaneously doing another, and it's
Yes.
definitely power.
Right. Pulling over the next chance I get. But yeah, let's drop
there's
into it.
like
I'm
a
here.
light beam, like an angelic light beam just grazing across your face because you're such an angel. And I think it's just a testament to like sometimes when we show up in these crunchier spaces where there's like the darkness is like wants to be kind of hidden, it's like that's when we're tested the most. And so like even though you are being
Yeah.
tested in the physical, like you are like rising to meet that with so much compassion and grace and beauty. And so I
Thank
just applaud
you.
you, and it's all perfect. It's meant to be.
It's always meant to be.
It is.
Yeah.
This light beam is amazing. It's everything.
Yeah.
We're
So
gonna
I'm
keep
gonna
it. There's the
I think
sun.
I'm gonna start off by yeah, I think what I'll do is just go into the interview with Heather now, Rosie, and then
Uh-huh.
about half an hour in when she needs to get off the call, then I will introduce you more properly to everyone watching and
Beautiful.
listening. And then we can just
Hmm.
hold witness for Heather and her
Yes, that's
experience right now.
exactly what I'm here for right now. So,
Perfect. Thank you for
Mhm.
joining us.
of course.
Oh yeah, and if you have any questions too for Heather as she's sharing, like we can kind of do it together if you feel
Okay.
called. Yeah.
Beautiful. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, Heather, I would love to have you just share whatever's coming through on your heart that of your experience with sexual assault, and yeah, just we'll just start from there.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I'm just going to take a deep breath before I begin this, and
Mm-hmm.
then I'll.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what's alive for me right now? It's really interesting. I've never shared like this before about my experiences. So there's definitely some nerves and resistance, and it feels like what's coming through is the process of what we go through is intricate and layered and not one whatsoever, and I'm still healing in this very moment. Like I'm feeling these things come up in my body before I share them. And yeah, I've had a few experiences where it felt like a boundary was crossed at the time. And my first experience was with a past partner in high school. And we'd been dating for quite some time. And we were at a party and we had drank a bit and started to initiate a physical connection. And immediately my body was like, no, I don't want to do this right now. It was also my party. So I felt a commitment to kind of hold space. And so I told him no. And he still proceeded to pursue the moment. And I said no a few times. And there was a certain point where it felt safer to surrender, to just say, like, okay, like, we've connected in this way before. And um, this is just something that, like, I should be doing. Like, it was almost like an obligatory thing. Like, my no doesn't matter. And like what he wants and what we've done before matters. And this is, again, coming from a perspective of like my high school brain and heart and body and soul. And yeah, so we ended up physically connecting. And after I felt really violated, really confused, and didn't really understand what happened. And I ended up sharing it with a friend of his, and he held space, but I was debating whether or not to call the authorities and like report it. And because it was a really, like, in a way, at a certain point, it felt consensual in the space of the moment that I surrendered to it. And I think that's the thing about these experiences. Um, is that uh, they're definitely
Can't hear you.
Oh, you can't.
You just cut out for like 10 seconds.
Okay. Um, anyway, that was the first experience.
Still can't hear you. Maybe Rose, if you can mute when you're not speaking,
Yeah.
so we don't get the background noise.
Let's see. 1 second.
And then perfect. And then Heather.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Of course, there's like some sort of sound resistance in me sharing this when it comes up because I'm feeling it in my body, and that just shows up in the world. But yeah, it feels important to share. It feels very healing to share and be seen and witnessed in these spaces. But so yeah, that was my first experience of feeling like a line had been crossed, but also feeling like I didn't say no clear enough, and I didn't ultimately like stop it. I didn't like scream. I didn't fight it. I just um, surrendered to it because it felt like the safest, most logical thing to do at that time. And then I was faced again with the same situation with a partner that I was dating in college. Again, there was alcohol involved on his end, and he started to pursue something. I said I didn't want it, like, no. And then he was like very persistent. And so again, I responded the same way. I froze and just eventually surrendered and tried to soften into the process. But everything in my body both times was just like, hey, this isn't what I want. But there was a piece of me that came through around feeling like there would be like some sort of retaliation. Like both weren't violent partners by any means, but like I was kind of I was scared, and I can see in those spaces when someone has an experience like this, at least in my experience, like you freeze and you're like, okay, how do I protect myself? So I just ultimately disassociated, like I moved through the motions, and then was left feeling really violated and crossed after. And yeah, those were like the two most intense experiences. And then I've had a few experiences in public where I'm just like walking around a nightclub or a bar, and someone would, the first time this happened, I was living in New York City, and this man came up behind me and literally reached underneath my skirt and grabbed my yoni, like in the middle of the dance floor. And I just turned around, and by the time I turned around, I could like already see him scurrying off. So it was like this hit and run experience. And that interestingly enough, almost like felt more violating. Like the face of the person couldn't even like face what they did. And I felt like, oh, I'm dressed in like a sexy way. And again, like there was this like guilt and shame of like, what did I do wrong? What did I do to call this into my field? And um, yeah, I think looking back at it, like there wasn't a clear conversation around boundaries, or there wasn't a clear conversation of what a no looked like, because I just didn't have those tools um, in my belt, and I didn't know how to handle the situation. So in pretty much all of them, I just froze and just kind of brushed it off, and then carried that trauma and discomfort in my body, and then just began to process it the last few years, still processing it now. Um, so yeah, it's a journey. Yeah, those were my experiences, and I'm open to questions, and yeah.
Oh, I just want to start off by just thanking you so much, both of you, just for your vulnerability and coming on here in front of so many strangers online and sharing your, like, some of your deepest, most tender moments. And just what's coming up through your stories is just how incredibly relatable these stories are, as I'm sure so many of us, most of us listening, probably have had a similar story, a similar experience, being in a nightclub, being drunk, being with a partner who forced themselves. And I don't know, I feel like, kind of with what you're saying, like, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was almost like in the moment, it didn't feel good, but almost like there's all these excuses of like, oh, well, maybe I shouldn't be dressing this way, or maybe I shouldn't be drinking, or like all these excuses. And then we kind of block ourselves from even recognizing that it was an assault to begin with. And it was a violation to begin with. And we go into shame and blame and guilt, and we internalize that instead of really recognizing it for what it is, which is a breach in not being consensual. And it's kind of brings me back to like the conversation we had a couple weeks ago with Tracy. That was such an interesting conversation. If any of you guys are listening, I highly recommend going back to this previous episode with Tracy, where she was just sharing that, like, all these different realms of abuse that we don't consider like abuse. Like, there's these more extreme cases where it is like clearly like a stranger or someone who comes onto us, which can be extremely traumatic, of course. Like, those are like the situations we kind of traditionally think of with sexual assault, but that the assault can happen in such like such like, what's the word, like overt or like subtle ways that we don't always associate with being abused. Like with a partner, we're like, oh, my partner would never abuse me, like, we're partners, like, of course they can just have sex with me whenever they want. But it's like, no, your body was telling you no, your voice was speaking no. And just because they're partners doesn't mean that we're giving them consent to enter us and to be sharing this really intimate space with them. And so thank you just for sharing these stories and how that really felt in your body, and not just in your body, but what you were voicing. And I know I've been in those situations too with partners where like I was not feeling it at all. And I almost feel like sometimes we feel like obligated to our partners, like we're just their sex doll, like to use whenever they want us. But like, absolutely not. Like, let's really talk about that and reprogram that and rewrite that story, because it always needs to feel consensual. And just because we have the hole doesn't mean that it's open to be penetrated whenever they want it to be penetrated. And that really like goes back to not just like blaming the man, right? It goes back to like the woman realizing that it is our sacred responsibility to protect our yoni and speak on behalf of our yoni and clear the shame and guilt that has blocked our throat chakras from like sharing that, or blocked our like bodies from sharing that and moving, right? Or like, or whatever. And yeah, so I just want to like reverberate everything you're saying, and that you were doing the best that you could at the time. And a common reaction isn't just fighting or flighting, it's also freezing. And in that moment, like, you were just in a trauma response, like you didn't know what to do. You were just like, you're just frozen because you felt like you spoke, right? Like you felt like you were doing everything you could to advocate for yourself, but your body was like in that freeze mode. So yeah, I'm just like reflecting on a lot. You shared a lot of good information, and I don't know, like, I guess, what have you learned through these experiences that you're now incorporating into your sexual relationships and your, dating relationships?
Thank you for that question, and thank you for the it is feeling really courageous and a bit scary to share this because I can still feel kind of like the guilt and the shame coming up in my body. Um, but I feel like for me, what I've learned throughout the years is a no is a no, and it's
Mhm.
my sacred responsibility to communicate to whoever I'm seeing what that looks like. And obviously, my situation is different because I was dating these men, and I know that there are situations that happen to women where it's a complete stranger, and but I feel like something that we've talked about that's provided a lot of safety and softening for me is having an RD BSMA conversation. Um, and that's just a conversation you can have anytime you're like feeling kind of some energy with someone. And it goes over, it's an acronym. It goes over our relationship status. B, you go over your boundaries before something happens. D, your desires. S, your sexual health. M, what you want to make what the experience will mean to you. And then A stands for aftercare, like how you want to be taken care of. And I feel like those types of conversations really have set up the platform for me to feel incredibly safe in potentially opening with someone. And I didn't have those tools then. And not to say that it might have still happened,
Mhm.
um, but I think for me, um, recognizing in those spaces that the partners like weren't violent and that I could have advocated for myself more strongly, and I don't feel I don't feel regret. Like I handled it in the best way that I could given the
Mhm.
circumstances. But if that situation were to happen now, I would just be like, no, absolutely not, and I would push them off of me and I would leave. Like I just feel like um my body would respond differently to the situation in really doing its best to protect my holy womb and like to protect myself. And I think that's like where the deepest shame and guilt come from is like, wait, why didn't you do more? Why didn't you scream? Why didn't you fight? You know? But then like the ego comes in and it's like, hey, like, this person and it's safe and it's okay. And like,
Mhm.
it's all right. You've done this before. And I think for me, there was a lot of like seeking external validation and like, oh, this means that they,
Mhm.
right? Like there's all of these stories that can come up in those spaces. But like one thing's for sure, I didn't want it. It didn't feel good and it wasn't consensual. And so like now I can really stand in that space of truth and no longer say like, oh my God, like I did something wrong. Like, no, I know that I did the best that I could. And I've forgiven myself and I've ultimately forgiven them.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, I hope that that answers your question.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Like the forgiveness piece, just tying it all together because it's like it's twofold. It's not just forgiving them, it's also forgiving yourself. And then those two like interweave together. And when you can forgive yourself, you can also forgive that other person. And something I just want to go back to that you mentioned is like, yeah, like you were doing the best that you could at the time with the tools and the knowledge and how you just viewed the world. Like we're always the way that we view the world and our perspectives of our reality is quantumly shifting. And back then in those days, and I think a lot of us maybe can relate to this still, is like we as women were raised to be in a society where it really is like about the man's pleasure.
Mhm.
We don't really talk about the woman's pleasure. And it's really focused on, well, how can I allow my man to orgasm? How can I allow him to finish? How can I please him? And even though it's not overtly always said that way, it's very like that is the subliminal messaging in so much of the cultural societal programming through movies, through conversations, through media, like all of it. It's really focused around the man's orgasm and pleasure. And so it's like no wonder that we grow up in these, even in relationships, not just even in casual hookups, but in relationships where we sacrifice our own pleasure for our partners. Like I've done that so many times where it's just like, okay, well, I'll just like make sure that he's good and it doesn't matter about my pleasure. It doesn't matter about my orgasm. Like that kind of just goes out the window. Like, and how sad is that? but that's like how we were kind of like, that was just like the norm. So it's like having compassion for yourself, because like that's how so many of us have, I don't know, seen relationships, sexual relationships. We have learned to deprioritize our pleasure, and in hopes for, like you're saying, like validation and like pleasing our partner, because in some weird backwards way their pleasure, man's pleasure in the patriarchal society we've lived in, has been on a pedestal over women's pleasure.
Mhm.
And so now it's like we're reclaiming our pleasure power, our pussy pleasure power. Those dynamics are becoming, they're shifting, right? And they're finding balance. But especially back in, I don't know, how long ago was this? Like 5-10 years ago?
Something like,
It's, yeah. Think about how much that has changed even in that short amount of time, and how much will continue to change.
yeah, it was a completely different timeline. And I felt that narrative. I'm happy that you brought that up in the collective, where I just was like, I don't even have pleasure. It was just really like about them and pleasing them and ultimately negating my internal desires or even speaking them. Like I didn't even have a gauge. Like it wasn't even in my consciousness to like speak into my pleasure and what
Mm-hmm.
that looked like. Um,
Mm-hmm.
First time I connected with a man and he was like, did you orgasm? Like, did it happen? And he was like, so like about me orgasming. It was like a breakthrough. I was like, wait, what? I was like, why does, I almost was offended, like that's how twisted the story had been woven
Mm-hmm.
into my conscious. But yeah, through it all, like I feel um like I feel grateful that these experiences happened because they've really allowed me to remember like my true sovereignty and my truth, and that no matter what happens to us, um it's not definitive of who we are. And um these situations take time to heal and to really process, but through that there's like deep, profound healing and layers shedding and new narratives forming and the new earth being born. And there's all of these beautiful things that kind of come through these shadow realms of experiences that I now sit as the woman that I am because I went through those experiences. So yeah, I feel gratitude now. I think that's also a
Mm-hmm.
key element in the healing process is like finding, and it's challenging, right? Like to find some sort of like appreciation and understanding for what happened as opposed to victimizing. Because I feel like for me, I've been caught in the victim space, and it's just you can get stuck there. Like it's like your fault. Why did you do this to me? You're wrong. And just beginning to really like take responsibility of my emotions, of my body, of my sovereignty, of my truth, and bringing that forward to anything that life throws at me feels really empowering. So yeah, I sit here feeling really empowered now and resilient through those experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah, gratitude is just like the medicine for everything, truly. And I'm sure that now, if you were in this experience where you were in a nightclub or at a bar and someone came up and grabbed your yoni, you would probably react completely differently than you reacted then. I'm
Yeah.
curious, like, how would you react in a situation like this now?
Yeah, well, I actually had a situation happen at Hedone, and I think I might have shared this with you, but I met this man, and there was a lot of energy building between us, and he was super sweet, and nothing had happened physically, just kind of hugging and communicating, talking, and we were on the dance floor, and I turned around, and all of a sudden, I just feel like slap on my ass. And immediately turned around and I was like, hey, that was not consensual. Please don't slap my ass.
Yes.
And it was like something moved through me. Like I was a vessel. It was so actually so beautiful because he immediately went into this like kind of shame spiral. And I could feel he was just like, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Like I didn't mean to do that. And he sat down and he was like visibly shaken. And I was like, hey, love, like I'm not upset with you. Like we learn in hindsight, and it's my responsibility to hold my boundaries. And you didn't know them. And now you do. And like, thank you for holding them. Thank you for apologizing. I'm not mad at you. I'm not angry at you. And it was like this really deeply vulnerable space where I almost like stepped into the mother archetype. And I was,
Mm-hmm.
hey, like, this is how we learn. We have to move through something, gather information to understand it. And he was so receptive. And I felt really proud about, you know, because I think oftentimes, like, when something like this happens, I mean, I've experienced it with like friends being out where they're just like, don't do that. Like, I'll like, you know, like I'll punch, like, you know, like they say something and then they dismiss them and they like point a finger and they're like, you're wrong. And then the person kind of can have a tendency to go into a shame spiral, right? Like, that's where we go psychologically. And I don't feel like it's addressing the issue. Like, it's putting a band-aid on it and it's like leading to more confusion and it's kind of perpetuating the issue. But I feel like as a woman, I have a sacred responsibility to really like sit down with someone when a boundary is crossed and explain to them like what it means, why it's important, and how we can do better moving forward.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
I've found like in that space with that conversation, it was incredibly beautiful and healing for both of us. Like, you know, I wonder how many times he's maybe done that to another woman and she just
Mm.
didn't feel good about it, but didn't say anything. So he genuinely didn't know. Like, I
Yeah.
could see it. He was like, oh my God, like no one has said something about this before. And I'm like, hey, like someone else could be into it. Like, I'm not, and that's okay. And like, this is a space to bring deeper levels of communication and truth to every interaction that we have with someone, and to kind of like set the energetic foundation
Yeah.
for what boundaries look like for us and how they're ever changing. Like, I could say
Yeah.
yes to something today. It does not mean I'm going to say yes to it the next day. And that's perfect too. So,
Yeah. Thank you for sharing all this wisdom. It also reminds me of Tracy's conversation where it's like instead of calling someone out, we're calling someone up.
mm,
So we're not like shaming them and perpetuating that cycle of separateness and like, oh, you're doing something wrong, but we're calling them up to see this other new perspective and really to a place of more compassion and understanding so that they're understanding their actions. And oftentimes I've been in this situation so many times where I'll just like not say anything or I'll just like make a really like face and kind of like run away. But it's like that's just yeah, that's not really doing anything to solve the problem. And I just want to say this isn't just for women, it's responsibility to men. It goes both ways. Men, I'm sure you've felt, unconsensually abused or assaulted by women in your life in different ways. And so this goes for all of us. We all have this responsibility. And as long as it's coming from the heart and it's coming from a place of compassion and understanding, then I really do believe that these messages that we can share with people have the power to truly shift perspectives and shift behaviors. And that's not always going to be the case. Sometimes people aren't going to listen. They're not going to be ready to listen, or you might not feel in a safe place to have that conversation with them. And that's a completely different situation. But, feel it out for yourself. And if you do feel like in that moment you have this opportunity to share your truth, then, try it. Try something new and see how they respond. And ultimately, we can only control ourselves, right? We can't control how they're going to react, but we can control what we say and how we react. So, yeah, just breathing in, maybe taking a few deep breaths, breathing into all of this. Oh.
mm,
Hmm. Oh.
mm, mm.
Hmm. Thank you so much for sharing, Heather.
You're welcome. Yeah, thank you for calling me to share. Um, it's like a space has served uh, a point of integration and reflection for my experiences and really putting a bow on everything and my continued process of healing.
Mm.
And yeah, remembering through it all, like that, yeah, compassion and forgiveness really are key on the other side of experiences.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like calling
Gratitude,
around.
like you were sharing too.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, calling the people around us to rise, you know,
Mm-hmm.
experience with someone else that you're not involved in, like it's in your field. And I feel like we have a sacred responsibility to speak into it and to with compassion, right? Because like what just like I had this vision of being like a little kid and doing something that was wrong, right? Or considered wrong. And like, I just remember feeling confused. My parents would be like, don't do that, that's wrong. But they wouldn't explain it to me. And I'm like, but I don't get it. Like, I don't understand why it's wrong. And I feel like the why is so important if and when you're having a conversation like this, to really explain like how important safety is and how important boundaries are. And um, coming from that space of like compassion and love ultimately, and recognizing that we're all just children of the universe, and we're all learning, and we're here to really walk each other, guide each other back home. And
Beautifully
you to
said.
yeah, yeah, if we continue to make things wrong without the explanation, then we're just perpetuating the issue itself. So like, yeah, beginning to have these conversations feels really important. So thank you again for giving me the opportunity and holding space. And yeah, thank you both of you for being here and witnessing it, and everyone else that's watching. It means a lot.
Thank you so much, Heather. So beautiful, so eloquent, and so relatable. So deeply relatable. So, yeah, now that we've had a chance to really dive into this topic, we're going to continue this conversation. For those of you who are tuning in, this is Taboo Talks with SISociety. We're talking about sexual assault this month. And yeah, this is a beautiful conversation we're having. And we're going to be transitioning now to hearing from Oceana Rose. And Oceana Rose is one of my dear soul sisters. We met in Hawaii in the beautiful island of Maui. She's a fine artist and devotional musician. Currently, she's traveling the world, sharing her soul song. And she's just one of the most heart-centered, pure light beings that I have had the opportunity to know and to love in my life. And I'm just so grateful to have you on this show. And if I don't know, what I just want to say before you start sharing is like, if someone who has been through an experience like you're about to share is now this embodied in purity and love and light, it just gives me hope that like anyone that's been through something traumatic can transmute it in the way that you have. And it's really inspirational to just your embodiment speaks for itself. So without further ado, I'd love to just have you share a little introduction to yourself, and then maybe just share the story that you want to share with everyone here.
Yes, sorry.
Okay. Hi,
Before,
beauties.
I love, before you
Hi.
hop in, I'm going to hop off, and I thank
Yes.
Lee and Oceana Rose. I can't wait to watch this, and my heart is with you, and you're courageous and beautiful, and I'm so grateful that you're here with us.
Thank you so much for sharing
Yeah,
what you have as well.
thank you for witnessing it. It's really healing, and I love you both, and I'm looking forward to connecting soon, and wishing you both the best and a lot of love through the remaining conversation.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a
Love
blessed
you.
day.
Love
Be well. Thank you. Okay. Wow, I'm feeling also what Heather had mentioned, like this, all of the kind of chaos and the motion that I've been traveling with coming to this now spot where I am to share. It's like there was some sirens wailing just a couple seconds ago, and I passed like a 6-car accident, like 6 cars had crashed, and that's why it was taking me so long. And like before that, my phone died, and it never dies. And I had to go get a charger at the Verizon store, and like all of these obstructions like came up so last second, and I was like, what does this mean? And like I'm already like feeling super like not hesitant, but like, I mean, it's hard to even think about what I'm gonna share because it brings up so much. And as much work as I have done, I still have such a long way to go. And I'm so honored to be seen. Thank you so much for seeing me in that light, and I can only hope to continue to be that in the world, and to be in my embodied truth, which is my foundation. So yeah, I feel like I have to also say that has always been me since I was a little girl, since I can remember, I've always felt like such a deep connection and presence with the spirit, with nature, with Mother, Father, God. And I think I chose to go through these experiences so I can consciously choose self-mastery. So something that I came through recently that I felt was so powerful was the meaning of the word majesty. Meaning, it means conscious beauty. So beauty that is, it knows itself, and it can access and acknowledge itself. And so, yeah, that's my whole mission, and I'm still very much so on the path, and I'm so honored to be here. Elfina, thank you so much for hosting these talks. They are so just life-changing, and vibrationally I can see them shifting the course of humanity and just how we relate with one another. It's so important. So I just wanted to say thank you for showing up as well, more and more in your embodied truth. You're so beautiful, and you just look so beautiful right now. In general, I have to tell you that.
Thank you, Angel.
So I want to start with saying that, and we can get into a story or two. Yeah. Yeah, oh my gosh, maybe it'd be good to start with a breath. So I'll breathing in now. And out, settling the heart space, the mind space, being in the body. I do feel sensations. Like, I felt this, just like an energy in my throat and butterflies. And I don't really talk on live very often. It's definitely an edge for me. So I'm really excited to have the opportunity to kind of stretch that muscle and show up in my authenticity as I am. So I'm really also honored to have that opportunity and to be sharing some things that I have never shared before, especially on the online space. So that's just kind of also an edge. But what Heather shared was really inspiring, and she said some things that really struck me, because I have recently even had some of those experiences where I didn't know how to respond to being violated, even though it wasn't like per sex per se, but even just being touched in the wrong way, and expressing that this doesn't feel good, maybe let's not do this, but not wanting to embarrass them, so that's a huge thing that I'm overcoming, is I don't need to, all I need to advocate is for myself. I don't need to advocate for someone else's experience. It's just how I feel is how I feel, and I can say it kindly with regard, mostly for myself. But it's really interesting what she said about explaining it, because I agree with that, but I also feel it doesn't need to be explained at the same time. A no is a no, and it doesn't have to be explained in depth. But I think what she meant is the why, with why it's not good to cross boundaries. I understand that, but I'm learning that I never have to explain my no, and a no is a no. So I'm going to start with saying that. And yeah, I mean, to start out, is there any specific question you want to address or to open the topic?
Yeah,
Alfina?
I mean, so Heather shared more of these maybe these situations that have happened to maybe a lot of us, and I know that you had a really deep, really challenging, specific scenario happen to you that I'm sure others could also relate to, that could really help them on their own healing journey.
Yeah.
So perhaps just sharing your story, and then how you've moved through that story since, through that experience.
Yeah, sure. So, when I was 17, I also was myself in certain scenario or situation that was a little precarious, and like most 17-year-olds would do. And I went out late one night with my friend, and actually to a club in Los Angeles, and I had lost her at one point. I was being given drinks. I don't even know how many I had, but I'm like super lightweight, and I always have been. So I got sick, and I was, I mean, not even really having that great of a time, but it was kind of interesting how sick I got so quickly. So something makes me think I was like maybe drugged, but I can't tell for sure. But I was purging a lot, and I eventually had someone call me an Uber because the bar was closing. And yeah, I was put in the front seat, and I was sexually assaulted. I was raped by my Uber driver when we were on the way back to my friend's house. And this was, of course, when I was a minor, so I was actually under 17, under 18, sorry. And it was very, I mean, in that moment, I froze, and I didn't know what to do. I mean, he saw me purging out of the side of the window on the way back. I was definitely like super intoxicated, and on top of that, like, I was a young girl. I didn't know how to, physically like protect myself from like a larger unknown person. So I so I just completely froze. And he like pulled over to this like random like side, and like took me off, and just completely violated me. And something that I am really proud of my 17-year-old self for is immediately going to the RTC, the Rape Treatment Center, the next morning, to get like swabs and try to get this guy's DNA in any way so that they can find and either arrest him or put him in or fire him from Uber, because I think I've also heard actually that there have been plenty of other cases from taxi Uber drivers. So I'm definitely not the only one. And that's absolutely horrendous and unacceptable. And background checks need to be more fortified for that kind of service, and for many other services that they're not. So that's something that I also advocate for. But yeah, I went to the RTC, and they did find this guy's DNA. They found him. They did get him fired from Uber. I was in the middle of my senior year in high school, so I didn't want to go through court cases across the country. I'm from New York City, but this happened in Los Angeles, so I wasn't in the space mentally or physically to actually go and for charging this guy and go the whole way, which, I mean, it's not that I wish I did, but I feel like that would have been really empowering if I did. But yeah, so that happened, and it was, strings of events before and after that have caused kind of like my lack of self-response ability to advocate for like how I'm feeling in the moment and how to move from that. So I definitely have overcome and learned so much. And I mean, I think even most recently in the last 2 years, more than anything, I have been able to really advocate for myself. And if I feel like I have like maybe not had done the best job recently with that, I know that I'm healing and doing better because I'm not as hard on myself as I would have been in the past, because that's a total trauma response as well, is like the self-shame, like what she mentioned, like self-shame spiral that some people can get into with like, I mean, like what she said again, with what Heather said, what hurts the most is like the self-betrayal. So like knowing you want to protect your holy sanctuary your womb space, your vagina and your sacred sex, and advocating for that, and with your voice and how connected your voice is to your womb. And so it's so ancestral and like in our DNA, and like how many of our mothers have allowed this to happen and for how long, especially with in the realms of how long toxic patriarchy has been in the lead, you know? So yeah, it just feels like on the deepest level, I'm rearranging my DNA and healing it on a vibrational level so that my future daughters and their daughters can choose peace and sanctuary within themselves and in their voice and know how to honor themselves. And so yeah, that's just really one experience I've had. I've had plenty of others where I was violated and my voice was not acknowledged in the first place or heard, and I just would go along with it. And yeah, a lot of gaslighting, and so I'm still learning, of course, like how to navigate that conversation around like when you are approached in that way and not wanting to engage with it. So yeah, it's kind of like, I think it's a societal shift that's happening, and like we all need to have a better grasp and awareness on how to relate with one another in healthy ways. And
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing all of this. Thank you for sharing such a tender part of your journey and doing it so boldly and bravely. And I know that you're definitely not the only one listening, watching, who has been through an experience with a stranger, or maybe even in an Uber car, like you're saying, in this like, yeah, really vulnerable place where you're like literally in someone else's home, basically, and you're kind of like at their mercy. And yeah, it's just like I'm just like still like breathing into it all and just like imagining what you went through and what so many others have been through. And I would just love for you to share, maybe like, we have about 10 minutes left, just a heads up, and then this will close us out, unfortunately, but maybe just sharing like what has helped you along the journey since then, like maybe briefly of like what you went through that was kind of like what negative coping mechanisms you took on from that, and then what positive coping mechanisms you integrated to get where you are now, to a place of like so much more healing.
yeah, absolutely. I feel like in that time of my life already in like a negative kind of like action spiral. Like I was relating with people that probably didn't have my best interests in mind and choosing to be sexually connected to men who really didn't like have my heart in mind either. So I think the biggest shift has been my own reclamation of like my inner father and like fathering myself, instead of course mothering myself in a renewed way and in a holistic way. So yeah, so I feel like it's like the father wound can be so tough to manage, because it's like it locks in on that inherent and that inner self-worth wound that is such a tricky one, and it of course is rooted in shame and not feeling like you are enough or worthy. So it's such a deep one to reroute and uncover. So working with that, I think most recently, is something that I've been really tapping in and tuning into. But for a while, when I didn't have the conscious awareness of my self-worth, or it wasn't even on my mind front, I definitely was choosing the wrong partners and the wrong friend circles and just the wrong life path. Like I don't want to say it was wrong, but it was definitely not aligned with my soul's truth. And so I feel like, yes, I've come a long way when it comes to aligning with my soul's truth and what is best for my heart, mind, body, and soul. So, yeah, I mean, I started listening to music that really uplifted me. People like Trevor Hall specifically, and like some really like heart-centered musicians that took me back to the center of why we're here and what our mission is as human vessels. Supporting the earth, returning to the earth, being with nature has exceptionally been a healer for me. Is the most divine healer there is Mother Earth. So being with the mother and learning to choose to be with beings who really uplift and inspire me has also been a really healing experience in my journey and beings that I can relate to. But yeah, I mean, the last couple years really just like I moved out to Hawaii when I was 21 to really heal my heart and open my heart, and I noticed I had all these walls and these patterns playing out that I was like choosing to engage with, and I ultimately realized it was my choice to continue to engage or not. So I think a huge part of this recent cycle is me consciously like affirming, acknowledging the cycle and the pattern, saying thank you, and choosing to move with a new version of who I choose to be consciously. So it's what it is it's just bringing and breathing consciousness into these moments where we do have the choice to direct how we see ourselves, how we treat ourselves, and ultimately how we treat ourselves is how we teach others to treat us. And we can always one more thing I wanted to say that reminded me to make this point with what Heather mentioned is we teach others with how we engage with ourselves. And so it has to do with physically removing yourself. One last thing, I'll give one more example of a recent experience where I was like cornered. I was in a different country, and by this man, we went on a date, and he like went from like 0 to 100 really quickly, and he cornered me and was really just over and again like taking off my clothes, like asking each and every time I said no. Like I think it was like out of here. And he was the one that drove me there, or like his place of property, and I was just like, I have no idea what I'm gonna do, but I
Your
definitely can.
voice is cutting out.
Can you hear me?
It just cut out like the last 30 seconds. Ironically, as soon as you started talking about your experience, your voice started, the audio started cutting out. So can you say that one more time, please?
So, can you hear me now?
Yeah, it sounds good.
Weird. Okay. Basically, he cornered me, and I was in a different country. I felt really like I felt like I didn't have any power besides my own like physical removal. Like I really did not care what this guy thought of me. He was violating and not responding or respecting. I don't even know if this guy knew what a no was. And I just was like, I'm getting up, and went outside, and he even tried like 2 more times to like get me to like give him some type of like sexual favor. And I was like literally so shocked and like embarrassed for him. I felt so awkward. I was like, what am I supposed to do? Like, he's driving me home. Like, obviously, like maybe in a different point in my life, I would have felt too uncomfortable to say no, but this is absolutely ridiculous. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
fuck no.
Yeah. So learning when to say fuck no and not caring how the other person's going to react. And sometimes that means it has to be this dramatic where you literally just remove yourself from the situation mean, maybe
Yeah, you
they're
just
not in
have
the
to
position to
remove the
hear
block.
you.
Hmm.
Yeah, he clearly wasn't even in the position to hear you.
Not at
And
all.
something I just want to touch on really quickly before we exit this call is like forgiveness and bringing it back to the situation that happened when you were 17 and just the situation since. Like, how have you been able to move forward and forgive these
Yeah.
people who really hurt you?
Well, that's definitely a process.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm still learning how to forgive myself. I mean, more than anything,
Mm-hmm.
for for just not advocating for myself. So that's, I mean, I feel like in so many ways I have, but I'm still like, I think a little bit harsh with my own um, relationship to that, especially like, I mean, having compassion and forgiveness is so ultimate for the self, and then making these mistakes, and it's a tricky thing to forgive another person's like horrendous actions. It's not like I understand them more than I really forgive them most of the time. Like, I understand that he just doesn't know. They don't know better. But it's definitely tough to like fully, I can forgive, but it doesn't mean I have to like allow this person or this energy anywhere near my life. So
Yeah,
so that's
definitely.
actually still something that I'm working on for sure, to be like 1,000,000% honest, is
Mm-hmm.
learning how to forgive,
Yeah.
specifically myself and then other people if they've
Yeah.
stepped over a line.
And thank you, like, just for doing that work, like showing up every day to like learn how to have deeper states of compassion for yourself
Yeah.
and understanding that like every relationship, every person in our lives is always a mirror. And so the more that we do that inner forgiveness work, it will naturally ripple effect into everyone in our lives who have hurt us, even in ways that feel unforgivable sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a journey,
Yeah.
potentially a lifelong journey, and there's no timeline on the forgiveness and healing process. It's so important to just be compassionate and patient with yourself, and it might take you a whole lifetime, and that's okay. And just as long as you're taking those steps every day, or in your life, to cultivate deeper states of forgiveness and compassion, that feels like the most important thing and the only thing we can really do, right?
Absolutely. Forgiving the self. And like I said, I feel like I've come so far, and I feel like there's just some like
Yeah.
subconscious or even like unseen factors that I'm still coming across in my everyday world that I can still better understand, so that I can free myself from the weight of holding myself responsible for not knowing then what I know now. And so as
Mm-hmm.
much as I've come so far, I'm still very much so like holding myself in that tender space and like doing my best to really
Yeah.
have
You're doing
compassion.
great. And I'm so sorry this is going to cut us off, but I just want to say thank you again so much for sharing your journey, Rose. I love you. Thank you for opening this space for everyone listening. And please, if you want to reach out and be a part of this deeper conversation, society, please DM us, and we'd be more than welcome to add you to our private group where we have discussions like this all of the time. Thank you again, Rose.
I love you.
Love
I
you
love you.
so much.
Have a beautiful day.
And everyone listening, love you too. And just trust your journey, trust your process. You're in the
Yeah.
perfect timing, and sending out so much love for everyone listening.
Always bless you infinitely. Thank you so much for holding this container. I love you.
I love you.
Be well. Signing